the little podium that I'd be happy to use as I respond to the throne speech. And I want to begin by respectfully recognizing and acknowledging that we are gathered here today on the unsurrendered and unceded traditional lands of the Wolastoqiyik. And this territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which the Wolastoqiyik, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Wolastoq, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. I'm honored to be in the legislature today and to have the opportunity to respond to the throne speech. Je suis fière de représenter les habitants de Marin-Cook-Tentramar au sein de cette législature, de faire valoir leurs préoccupations ainsi que leurs espoirs et leurs aspirations pour leur communauté, pour nos communautés. I deeply appreciate their support and thank them for placing their confidence in me once again to bring their concerns and voices to the legislature and speak on their behalf. Elections are a team effort, as we all know, and I had such a wonderful campaign team who worked tirelessly with me under challenging conditions of a snap election during a pandemic, and I thank them for their countless hours of hard work. I would also like to thank my supporters who trusted me with their votes. I am proud to represent every single person in my riding and look forward to continuing to work together in the coming years. J'apprécie les formidables membres du personnel qui se surpassent, ainsi que mes collègues Vert, le député de Fredericton-Sud et le député de Kent-Nord, qui sont des sources inestimables de soutien et de solidarité. Et enfin, mais surtout, je tiens à remercier ma famille. Se présenter aux élections est un énorme investissement en temps et énergie, un engagement qu'il est impossible de prendre sans le soutien et l'aide de ses proches. My husband, Steve, my mother, Gail, my extended family have all stepped up to make it possible for me to be here to do this important work, and I'm deeply grateful for them and for my daughter, Quinn, each and every day. Memramcook-Tantramar is a beautiful riding, and it's also quite big. It stretches from Memramcook to Cape Tormentine, Bayvelt to Rockport, and includes Sackville, Dorchester, Port Elgin, Umlumgug, also known as Fort Folly First Nation, and so many other communities. To the east, it reaches out into the Northumberland Strait, to the south down to Shepparton Bay. It includes green fields in the Memramcook Valley, includes the Tantramar Marshes, and miles of forests. In between and along the coast, there are so many beautiful spots with farmers and artists dotted around the rural landscape. And what truly makes Memramcook-Tantramar amazing is its people. I love the region I represent, and I'm proud to represent it. And so, as I listened to the throne speech, I wanted to know, does this throne speech have a vision that responds to the needs in my community, in our communities? Does this government have a vision for and a path toward economic, social, and climate justice? Does it address the challenges this province is facing in terms of health care? And to start, in my area, healthcare is, and I'm sure maybe across the whole province, healthcare is a priority. And in my area, that means protecting the Sackville Memorial Hospital's services, and it means enhancing healthcare and understanding that healthcare provision may look different in rural areas, but that we deserve access to emergency care, and that we need to speak with our communities, ensure that there's proper consultation, and that we can help shape what our healthcare systems will look like. There are gaps in our system. For example, palliative care, there's a gap there. We need to make sure we're providing care and dignity for all our community members. There are nursing shortages that are leaving hospitals understaffed and other things understaffed, which is not only bad for the staff, it's extremely bad for the patients. We're seeing mental health services that are needed by many in our community, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and many mental health issues are being exacerbated. Some people may have lost some of their services. We need more resources to be focused here. And in mental health and other areas of health, we need to focus on prevention and earlier interventions. We also need local decision-making. This goes across a lot of different parts of government. This is especially true for healthcare. Our communities have asked to be part of shaping what the consultation process looks like. There are so many times that governments consult and it's ineffective, it doesn't meet the needs of the community, and I know that the people who are working on the committee to protect our hospital in Sackville want to have a say in how the consultations happen. And going back to preventative health care and earlier interventions, when we put resources into preventative care, prevent diseases, intervene earlier, it not only ensures better health outcomes for individuals and families, but healthier populations result in healthcare savings across the systems. We need to have some really long-term thinking when it comes to this. Le programme extramural est une fierté pour le nouveau-brunswick, mais c'est dommage que nous privatisions des aspects de nos systèmes de soins de santé quand ce système est d'une importante valeur pour les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. The throne speech did not address the real problem, which is the private management of public services. We need to return the management of extramural and ambulance NB to the public sector. And if we're honest, many parts of our healthcare system are not really public, and they're not free. Many people have to pay out of pocket or simply can't afford the care they need. A lot of mental health care available is only accessible with insurance or with money, sometimes both, and therefore it is not accessible. There are other parts of our healthcare systems that aren't accessible either. Dental care, as if our teeth aren't in our heads, as if dentists don't provide important health care, and that there aren't health issues like heart disease linked to dental care. People with diabetes and other diseases often face expensive costs for medical equipment that they required. Some are unable to afford it. A lot of medical equipment is not covered and is too expensive, so people go without things like glasses and hearing aids, when we know that being hard of hearing and not having a hearing aid can contribute to mental health issues like depression. So again, we could have interventions that prevent other healthcare issues. We know these things, but governments don't seem to care. And I guess I'm speaking provincially and federally because we need a national pharmacare program, and I'd like to see government, the provincial government, push for that. And speaking of access, there are limitations in this province to accessing health care that is appropriate for people in the 2S LGBTQ+ community and for accessing surgical abortions. And the discriminatory laws that were created many years ago continue to stand with Schedule 8420, and it needs to be changed. I've spoken many times about that in this House, and it just needs to be changed. It is unacceptable to maintain this regulation that discriminates against half the population. The nursing shortage is hitting a critical point. We all saw this coming for years. So how could successive governments fail to act and fail to really address this issue? We have seen many issues in terms of care workers, in terms of recruitment and retention, and it seems that no one really wants to take responsibility. But nurses need a fair contract. They need pay, they need to be paid competitive wages. We need to be training more, not fewer nurses here in this province. There's been wait lists for people who want to become RNs, and they just can't get in. And then they need to be hired, full-time positions, and not be lured away to other provinces where they can actually get a full-time job. We undervalue care work. Historically, we have done that in our society because that work has been done traditionally by women, and we misunderstand its value. Investing in care, whether we are caring for our children to ensure they get off to a good start, or supporting our elders in our province to stay at home longer, for example. It is better for people, and it can be better for the bottom line. Housing issues sometimes look different in rural areas, and this is strongly connected to healthcare. There aren't always big apartment buildings hiking up rent and mass rent evictions in rural areas, Sometimes in rural areas, people own their own homes, but lack the resources to maintain them. And this is especially true for seniors and for people living on lower incomes, on fixed incomes. Helping people stay in their homes is something we keep hearing government say is important, and it was stated in the throne speech. We need to do more. Government needs to do more to ensure that actually happens. And one concrete way to make that happen is to adequately fund the homeowner repair program. There are people applying with water coming in their windows and their roofs, and they're waiting for the money to be able to stay in their home. And sometimes what that means is the difference between someone staying in their home or having to move into a nursing home. So if we want people to stay in their homes, let's help them stay in their homes. Let's make that a priority. These repairs can be done, and another layer of that connects with climate change, because all of these issues are all connected, but it can be expensive to heat one's home, and we can make homes more energy efficient. And this is very important, not just to reduce energy use, but to help the most vulnerable in our society be able to afford to heat their homes. And so we can help to make sure that we have energy efficiency made a priority. It would reduce consumption at provincial level, reduce energy cost for the individual, and help money circulate in the local economy by helping fund those who are doing those retrofits. Nous avons aussi besoin de l'équité salariale et de stratégies de recrutement et de rétention solides pour tous les travailleurs et travailleuses du secteur des soins. Avec le vieillissement de la population, nous devons vraiment veiller à ce que nos aînés aient des options. Il existe de graves lacunes dans le soutien aux aînés, aux personnes handicapées et aux soins palliatifs lorsqu'il s'agit de soins à domicile. And actually, I have a personal story about that. There was a home care worker who worked in my home when my dad was sick. And she was really wonderful at her job. But she had precarious hours, not adequate pay, and I ran into her working in a gas station about a year later. And she wasn't going to be doing home care work anymore, and she should have been, because she was wonderful at it, and we need home care workers, but the working conditions are just not adequate for people to be able to live. So there's a lot more to be done on this. There are seniors who, again, can't stay in their homes because they can't find home care workers. There's a real shortage. And if we think about it, care work is part of the green economy. Low carbon emissions, you can't outsource that. It's community focused and it's meaningful. Now, I'm going to talk about roads and infrastructure. There's a shocker. Many of the ongoing issues in my riding relate to infrastructure and transportation. Much of Memramcook-Tantramar is protected from flooding by centuries-old dikes, but rising water levels and the types of storms we've been experiencing in recent years have stretched them to their limit. This is a fear that many people in my riding live with constantly, is that there'll just be the perfect storm that overtops the dikes, and Sackville and surrounding areas will be underwater, including the highway, which is a very important one, the Trans-Canada Highway. So they need to be better maintained, in some cases upgraded, to be able to withstand the new normal in our water and weather patterns. And this may even only be a relatively short-term solution. Government at provincial and federal level have been too slow to react. While we wait for another study to be done, which is underway now, it seems to be taking forever, and we're at risk every year. We need solutions and plans sooner rather than later. Nous avons également l'Institut de Memramcook, qui a beaucoup de potentiel, mais qui reste vide. La situation de l'œuf ou la poule est malheureusement dans le cas de ce bâtiment historique. On nous dit qu'il est nécessaire d'avoir des locataires avant que la prochaine étape ne puisse être franchie, mais personne ne signera le bail avant que les travaux de l'immeuble soient presque terminés. Même si le ministre des Transports et de l'Infrastructure reçoit une demande d'un espace pour lequel l'Institut de Memramcook serait parfait, l'Institut ne peut pas être envisagé dans sa condition actuelle. Le bâtiment est tombé dans l'oubli, comme beaucoup de membres de la communauté le déplorent depuis des années, dans l'espoir que cet espace soit à nouveau utile un jour. Un centre communautaire, le Centre de pédiatrie sociale et d'autres organisations souhaitent utiliser cet espace, mais leurs plans sont suspendus indéfiniment. Des rénovations doivent aller de l'avant et le gouvernement doit travailler avec la communauté et la municipalité pour que l'Institut de Memram Cook puisse à nouveau servir la communauté. And once again, the community needs to have a say. So I'm mentioning it in healthcare. It touches a lot of different issues. Community needs to be at the table for the Memram Cook Institute. I also hear many comments from constituents about the state of our roads. Many are long overdue for maintenance. Some of the roads in my riding no longer have lines painted on them because their money simply isn't there. Safety isn't prioritized for rural areas because it costs too much. Improving and maintaining our infrastructure requires investment. We need to do a better job of managing our assets and not allowing them to crumble and fall into disuse. You can't have an asset management plan that doesn't bring all your assets up to an adequate level. You can't leave roads like Route 16 in a patchwork state for years. It is simply unacceptable and it is dangerous. And to add to that, in rural areas, we need brush cutting and mowing to be more regular. It's a matter of safety. And we even have a specific corridor for moose to travel through, and there's not enough brush cutting in that region. It's simply unsafe. So, many New Brunswickers live in, pretty much everyone in my riding, we live in rural areas, and so we need to make sure investments in our rural regions are made. When we talk about the environment, Memram Cook Tantramar is especially vulnerable to climate change. And I've already mentioned the dikes. Flooding in particular is of deep concern. We need plans to help the people in my riding and all across New Brunswick to face the realities of our changing climate with emergency preparedness and investments in infrastructure like dikes, and how to respond when droughts threaten our water supply and have impacts like hay shortages. There are people in my riding whose wells have run dry, who've been without water for months. And this is going to become our new reality. There needs to be solid plans in place, whether that's investing in infrastructure, trucking water, whatever that is. What does that look like to make sure everyone has water? There are certain things that are human rights, and we need to treat them like human rights. Having water, having housing. We need to be bold on climate policy. We need to put all people and the planet that we rely on for survival above economic fears and illusions. We need to make sure that we keep asking who benefits from this, who is harmed by this, as we make decisions and chart our path forward and out of this mess. And what kind of thinking got us here in the first place? Because I don't think that type of thinking is going to get us out of it. These issues are hard to face, and even when it's hard, we must remember why we're doing this. Frankly, this is a life or death situation. Not for everyone, because not everyone will be impacted the same. But there are people who have already died because of climate change, and there are people who will die, and there are people in New Brunswick who will be impacted more. There are people in my riding who can't afford an air conditioner, but we've been experiencing countless heat waves. There will be more vectors of disease moving north that we need to be worried about. Mental health has a huge impact. We're seeing flooding this week where people are stranded in their homes. We've seen droughts where people don't have water. There are emergencies and there are long-term impacts, and even the nutrition of the food we grow and whether we can grow that food is changing. Mitigation and adaptation present opportunities within the greater challenge of climate change. So we have the opportunity to produce renewable energy. We have the opportunity to produce local goods so they don't have to travel as far. There are ways to save money by making buildings more energy efficient and by focusing on healthy local food. These are all things within our power that we can do immediately. This throne speech references plans with energy efficiency and renewable energy, and I want to see some concrete plans, and we need to see them right away. We've been talking about it for years, and it's time to take action. So I'm not clear on what will materialize, but it needs to be more than we've seen so far. As we just heard, Canada ranked 61 out of 61 in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of climate action, and New Brunswick is 7th out of the 10 provinces. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we need rapid and far-reaching transitions in all aspects of society. We need systemic change across all of our systems. But we are measuring success differently, I think, the governing party and I sometimes. So what if our focus wasn't just things like GDP, but rather have all children, and have all New Brunswickers for that matter, had meals today? Do they have housing? Do they have heat? Sure, money, GDP, debt, all parts of our economy, and that tends to be the focus. So we measure GDP and debt and their ratio, but I want government to be measuring and caring about the results of inequality, of the pay gap, of poverty rates, of the number of people without affordable housing, which I think is about 28,000 in the province, food insecurity, and more. We face a moment that will decide our fate, my fate, the fate of my daughter, the fate of my riding, the fate of all New Brunswickers, and if we are measuring GDP instead of how to create resilient communities and these other factors to create this in a livable climate, we won't take the right actions, and we won't take them urgently. Many of the challenges we face have had solutions proposed for decades, since before I was born, and the perils of ignoring climate change and the climate crisis, and the solutions required to prevent its worst impacts have been known for decades. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask, what are we waiting for? Because I, for one, am tired of waiting. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to talk a little bit about education, and one of the first things that comes to mind is the pandemic, because the pandemic has created a lot of strain on everyone involved in the education system. And I realize I have not talked that much about the pandemic in my throne speech so far, and I think that's a reflection that the pandemic wasn't very present in the actual throne speech itself. However, it has had huge impacts on my community, on every community in the world, probably, and we are lucky that we're in a relatively safe place in the world. However, there have been significant impacts on mental health, on our healthcare system in general, on the border. I live in a border community, and that continues to be very challenging, but maybe that's a speech for another day. And the economy, it just touches everything, and education is one of the places that there's a lot of strain. And so we see teachers who are overextended, and staff, and students, and parents who are all trying to navigate working virtually, and I commend them for doing that, and I would like to see us do that as well. But it's very difficult because teachers are often trying to manage in-person and online, and extra surveillance, and not having a break. And so the expectations are really high, and it's really hard, and I'm hearing concerns that there's going to be burnout, there's going to be mental health crises, they're on the horizon. So that's what's happening in this moment. We also need to look at what's happening in the long term. We need to look at infrastructure when it comes to schools. And the focus on community schools, we've been bringing that up, I've been bringing that up for years, and people in my community want that more and more, and we need to see an actual plan for how we can have community schools. I also am underwhelmed by what's happening with food programs. There's so much of an opportunity to make sure that every child is fed breakfast and lunch, and to have an actual government food program, not outsourced, but we have examples in our province where there are cafeterias that aren't even run because of the contract with the food company, and then we have beautiful cafeterias where it's like local food that's handmade, and it's awesome. And we really need to shift it all towards that one, and not the ones that they won't even run the cafeteria in some of the schools in my riding because it's not profitable. That's just frustrating. So some kids don't deserve lunch in the cafeteria because it's not profitable. So there's a lot to be done in terms of those systems. And again, the decision-making at the local level needs to be a priority. And this goes across all these topics. And the policies need to respond to the local needs and have the decision-making be closer to the community. Les gens ne ressentent pas qu'ils ont le pouvoir de prendre des décisions qui ont des impacts sur leur communauté. Par exemple, les décisions concernant les fonds pour l'infrastructure de leur école, and whether it be the location of the school or the specs of the school, which I think need to be revisited, communities want a say. I was looking at the Bird report from 50 years ago that evaluated the status of women in Canada, and it stood out to me that a recommendation was still outstanding, and that was for a national child care program. My mother actually served on a committee at the provincial level for early childhood education, petite enfance, recommending universal child care decades ago. And so here we are, very slowly starting to go in the right direction. And I know, again, that it takes multiple levels of government, but we need to see more action on this. Early childhood education workers are also wondering if they're going to get that wage increase that's been promised to them for the essential work that they do. And I'm eagerly waiting to see that promise kept as well. And education at every level is so important in our province. And we need to increase the recognition that education starts in early childhood education and continues on to post-secondary education. And the students at that level, post-secondary, have outlined priorities that I would like to see advanced. And they have many, whether that's making sure that international students are taken care of in terms of a financial relief package and making sure that their tuition is stable, I guess. And they've proposed funding for, they would like funding for reconciliation through post-secondary education to happen. They have proposed having e-mental health services available for post-secondary students, having funding allocated to that. And I support their call for the government to eliminate interest on the provincial portion of student loans. And additionally, they've called for the government to conduct an inquiry into systemic racism in New Brunswick. And I support that call as well. And finally, something that has come up more recently, and they have two calls related to this. It's calling on the government to adopt legislation requiring standalone campus sexual violence policies on all publicly funded university campuses, and that this legislation shall include provisions ensuring student involvement in the drafting and amending process, as well as built-in metrics to guarantee the clarity of the reporting structure at each institution, and as well provide funding or directly fund specific trauma-informed support services on all public post-secondary campuses. And so there are some very important things that our post-secondary education students are championing, and I hope that government is listening. And that one relates to the need for the report on preventing and responding to sexual violence in New Brunswick. That needs to be adequately funded, and especially direct services in our communities. To hear the speech from the throne, one might think New Brunswick didn't have any problems with poverty. I heard very little that will help New Brunswickers who are struggling to feed their families or keep a roof over their heads. Where was a basic income guarantee? We could do a pilot project here, and starting with people with disabilities and ensure that people have enough to live on. Why did the government not address the fact that social assistance and the income many seniors receive isn't enough to live on? Why were there no changes to the unfair rules that claw back their income? And why is the government insisting on maintaining the household income policy? And I had a meeting where I discussed this recently, and it was pointed out that there's actually we need to have a gendered lens, as we always should on these policies, but it disproportionately affects women and women with disabilities for the household income policy, where they need to choose between getting married and losing their income, and it's unacceptable. We need to increase affordable housing. We need to see the government invest in more than 151 new units over 3 years. We need to have some rent stabilization to ensure that rent is not out of control. And we need to implement all of the recommendations from the Premier's Council on Disabilities, the report that they released this summer. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And I want the government to, this was not really outlined, I want government to be taking action immediately on this. Nous avons entendu beaucoup de choses à propos de l'économie, mais je pense qu'on a besoin de nouvelles idées. Ce ne sera pas les grandes entreprises qui vont nous sauver. On voit un manque d'investissement pour appuyer nos petites et moyennes entreprises durant cette pandémie. Il faut changer nos décisions d'achat, pas seulement des individus, mais aussi de l'administration, pour améliorer notre économie. Acheter les produits et les services locaux peut faire circuler des millions de dollars dans notre province. Et plus important que ça, c'est que nous devons investir dans les produits pour nourrir notre province, pas seulement miser sur les exports. C'est vraiment important. We cannot afford to invest in any more fossil fuel infrastructure. Our climate can't handle it, and we cannot continue on that path. And we shouldn't invest in SMRs, the small modular reactors. The issue of waste has not gone away when it comes to nuclear energy. They won't even be ready for a while because it's an unproven technology. And the action that needs to be taken on the climate crisis is now, not in 10 years or so when it might be ready. And it's very expensive. So why would we not use the technology that we do have and avoid this dangerous, unproven, and with technology that would create waste that, for the purposes of our lifetimes, will last forever. We don't need to do that. We don't need to pursue that. We can pursue solar. We can install solar panels. There are cooperatives who want to invest in this and who want to invest in wind. People in our communities want to do this. Often there's regulations limiting them, but we can change that here. And we're being left behind by other countries, other communities who are expanding their renewable energy markets. New Brunswick could lead with renewable energy. And we know that storage, batteries are improving all the time, and that the cost of renewables is going down. So let's diversify and decentralize our energy usage in this province. And once again, an underestimated solution to a lot of our problems is energy efficiency. We must increase the spending on that and help those who are most vulnerable in our communities. Looking at Crown forests, those controlled by the provincial government are a public trust and must be managed in a way that upholds treaty obligations to First Nations, provides sustainable livelihoods and economic opportunities for forest-dependent communities, and maintains the ecological integrity of the forest. Nous avons le devoir de limiter sévèrement les coupes à blanc et de mettre fin au épandage pour préserver notre faune et la diversité de la forêt acadienne, qui peut s'adapter au changement climatique. The current forestry deal is not good for our province, and I would like to see us enact legislation to cancel the 25-year contracts with forestry companies signed by the Alward government, retained by the Gallant and Higgs governments. And I did not hear a lot in this throne speech about supporting rural economies, which I think is a serious oversight, considering how many New Brunswickers live in rural areas, pretty much my whole riding. Et je suis fière de représenter une circonscription rurale. La priorité doit être de se concentrer sur notre économie rurale et de tirer profit des possibilités qu'elle offre. We need to redefine the word economy. It should serve us and not the other way around. If you care about finances and the bottom line, then you must care about people and the environment. It's better for our finances to have a healthy population with enough money to meet at a minimum their basic needs, and they'll spend that money in local businesses. It's better for our finances to have a resilient local environment and community. And I want to make sure that I speak about the need for an inquiry that is independent and Indigenous-led into systemic racism in this province, especially in the policing and justice systems. And I think that there have been other calls, especially from Black Lives Matter, to look at systemic racism in other systems in our province. It's in our healthcare system, our education system. It touches everything because it's part of the fabric of our society, unfortunately, but ignoring it won't make it go away. We must look directly at it and listen to those impacted and move forward from there. Nous devons reconnaître et gérer dans le respect des traités de paix et d'amitié conformément à la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. And government must help preserve Indigenous languages and culture in New Brunswick by securing federal funding for Indigenous language teacher training and immersion programs for Indigenous children. They must implement all the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action and implement all the recommendations or the calls to justice of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. We must also, we must build better relationships and with First Nations on a nation-to-nation basis. And speaking of relationships, we must also build better relationships with the municipalities in this province. And as a former municipal councillor, I'm particularly aware of many issues facing New Brunswick municipalities, and I've seen firsthand the province's lack of consultation. I remember being on council, and we were just told that the Municipalities Act was changing. No consultation had happened. And so, I want to make sure that the smaller municipalities, like towns and villages, are also consulted, not just cities. And so I hope that this is changing. Parce que les municipalités ont besoin d'un soutien en matière d'infrastructure. Municipalities do important work. They're on the ground level dealing with so many things, and they need a lot of support. They need power to make changes in terms of housing. They need infrastructure support to deal with climate adaptation. And then in rural areas, a major issue is dealing with unsightly premises. And so I'm going to throw that out there because that is a pain and an eyesore for many people in rural areas, and it becomes an issue. And many people in rural areas lack protections because of where they live, environmental protections and otherwise. And so I also want to add that we could learn a thing or two about collaboration from the municipal world where they don't vote and just work along party lines. Memramcook, le berceau de l'Acadie, est dans ma circonscription. Alors, on a des anglophones et des francophones dans Memramcook-Tendremort, et ce ne devrait pas être une grande surprise qu'une des préoccupations des personnes dans ma circonscription soit leur droit linguistique. We need to ensure that the official languages review happens in public, and we need to ensure that language rights are protected and that we do not go backwards in any way, shape, or form. I think also we are underestimating many New Brunswickers, doing ourselves a profound disservice, thinking we can't learn more than one language. It's a strength of our province to be bilingual, not a weakness. However, I do have a concern that in the education system, aiming for conversational French for all students, that's great. I also don't want to lower the bar for students in French immersion or for students being able to attain high levels of French. I think that's important to maintain that higher level. So the challenges facing our province are complex. There are no easy solutions, but we do need to do a better job of seeing the whole picture and see how things are connected. Il faut regarder à nos défis et voir les liens. There are plenty of good ideas out there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to incorporate some good ideas. There's basic income guarantee. That's a great idea. Midwifery, there's a wait list for midwives here. Let's do that, and it could actually save our system money. There are great ideas here, and some of them just get rejected. But we can't talk about issues like poverty, environment, healthcare, economy, education as if they're separate. They are all connected, and I've heard hints at this. I hope that government is seeing, because of the pandemic, all the connections between these things. So, does this throne speech offer a vision for justice? A vision that benefits my community? I confess to feeling a bit underwhelmed in those areas and worried about the guiding values. Saving the world, saving people's lives should not be a partisan issue, and ensuring a future, let alone a good one, for the people of New Brunswick should be at the top of everyone's agenda. I ask the government to be humble and consider where they might have it wrong, who are you leaving behind, what is not understood? Where are the blind spots in the throne speech? I've outlined some answers here today. I know the people of Memramcook-Tantramar are ready for some changes, and although the future may feel bleak, as we head into winter and a pandemic, we do need to hold on to hope. I know many people are struggling right now, and I know that we'll get through it if we work together. But I once read a book, and the title was "It Doesn't Have to Be This Way," and that kind of captures how I feel about how things are in the province. That it doesn't need to be this way, which it expresses frustration, but it also expresses hope. I do worry that this vision in the throne speech leaves people behind. I didn't hear things about the 2S LGBTQ+ community, about women, lower income people, people with disabilities, people in rural areas. So I do worry that some people are missing in this vision. And so how can I support a document without that vision that works towards justice? Well, I will ask myself every day how I can bring that vision and work for justice in the People's House every day that I'm here. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Will Allen.